Hello Internet! Just like my episode on Wednesday, I'm once again in a completely different location. And also, like my episode on Wednesday, I'm once again not by myself. With that said, let's get started with this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. So yeah, once again I'm on location at the Megaplex at Valley Fair Mall, which I didn't really know existed until, well, earlier in the week. And, well, I'm joined by two guests. This is my sister, Sariah.
Hello.
And this is Kimi.
Hi. She's my friend.
Now, to give a little insight into kind of the range of opinions we're working with here, I'm coming at this from a film perspective because I mostly know about the filmmakers and kind of some of the behind-the-scenes stuff to it, so I'm coming at it more from the perspective of someone who studies film. Kimi over here is coming in from the perspective of someone who's a fan of the comics, so she's got her own take on it, as well as her own preconceived ideas of what who Superman is and the various stuff that entails a Superman story, and she's the middle ground. So yeah, going into this film, I was kind of worried, mostly because this has got the guy who directed Watchmen and, well, Sucker Punch, which is my most loathed film. But point being, I was kind of worried when they announced that Zack Snyder was the director. Heck, I was even kind of nervous when Christopher Nolan was announced to be attached as producer because, simply put, Superman is not Batman, and so I was worried that they were going to try to make it too much like The Dark Knight, which was a valid concern amongst a lot of people because, well, Superman is not Batman. Coming out of it, let's just say I had fairly worrisome expectations, also because at the time of this video, at least according to the news sources, it's currently got like either 70 or 60% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I had fairly low expectations, but I was pleasantly surprised. The first thing that I really gotta say is that I think Zack Snyder was kept on a pretty tight leash this time creatively, but his style of filmmaking, he seems to work a lot better when he's not writing the script. I mean, there were still some key things of Zack Snyder's filmmaking style that I noticed, but you can tell that there was a lot more of a, can't really think of the right words for it, but you can tell that there was a greater degree of control on both the parts of Christopher Nolan and the other producers, as well as on the part of DC, and kind of saying, hey, you're not going to necessarily abuse the slow-mo so much, because although there is slow-mo, it's not to the extreme degree that Zack Snyder is known for. There are two gripes that I have with this film. Feel free to jump in at any time.
We're ready.
Well,
We're ready to hear your gripes, or did you want us to say anything about the slow-mo because I was giving you
oh. Well, I'll start with the gripes then. The two things that I had the major gripes in, one was that the beginning was kind of long, particularly when it came to the fate of Krypton. It's not that it's long in a sense that it's boring or bad, it's just a case that it's just, in my mind, I'm thinking, they're devoting a lot of time to this, more than most people usually do.
It made me wonder how long the whole movie was going to be if the setup was that long.
And one thing I definitely can say, Russell Crowe, definitely a better Jor-El than Marlon Brando. I mean, by far, because he actually has the accent, whereas Marlon Brando only wishes he could have that accent.
True dat. I was pleasantly surprised by Russell Crowe, may I say one?
Go ahead.
Okay, because I don't know a lot about filmmaking or a lot about Superman, but I did know that Jor-El was supposed to be a scientist, and when I heard Russell Crowe was playing him, all I could picture was Gladiator. And I was like, oh great, it's gonna be Les Mis all over again. But it was actually pretty awesome. He did a really good job.
Well, he's played scientists before in A Beautiful Mind, so he at least knows how to kind of approach that sort of role. So that wasn't because Russell Crowe, good actor, terrible singer. I'm just glad this wasn't a musical. My second gripe, and it's kind of the same gripe that I had with The Dark Knight Rises, where the music felt a little too strong. And this is particularly in the case of the surround sound, because the problem I had with Dark Knight Rises, especially when it was at the end, which is something that was sort of rectified in this one, but best way to describe it, just felt like they were going right up to the very end with the music. Thankfully, they at least didn't do that too much in the final scenes, but being in the surround sound theater and hearing that during the credits, I'm just like,
I was gonna say, I was getting Inception flashbacks, because I watched Inception in the theater, same composer, by the way, so every time you heard
awesome
it,
composer.
wong, everything shook, so it was very much...
Yeah, Hans Zimmer, composer for pretty much the Dark Knight trilogy, was also the composer for this film, so that explains the similarities.
We had a fight on the way over here
These
because
two, not...
she adores Hans Zimmer. I think he's great, but she thinks he's greater than I think he is. So,
Greater than.
yeah, I do think he's great.
Well, jumping on the great things, here are the things that I really did like about the film. The first thing was the characterization. I mean, let's be honest, after reviewing In the Cold Light of Day, I did not have a lot of faith in Henry Cavill's acting ability, but at first I was kind of like, well, I was iffy about it, but he grew on me, and I did eventually start to see him as Superman.
He basically starts out as Superman and has to adopt Clark Kent, which was so different because you're so used to being introduced to Clark Kent, and then this time they introduced you to Superman, and he has to figure out how to be Clark Kent to be Superman.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that a lot of people already know about Clark Kent. I mean, a lot of people have seen the Richard Donner films. A lot of people have seen Smallville, which was pretty much all Clark Kent, to the point where a lot of people got impatient for like 5 seasons, even though it lasted 10 seasons. And so I guess that it was probably the kind of cultural climate that the filmmakers making this film kind of realized what they were getting into. So it was just a case of, yes, he's Superman. We assume you already know all the stuff that Superman is known for. And yeah,
Show you some of the stuff you don't know about Superman.
Or it's just kind of a case of, let's put him in a scenario you're not familiar with.
Like, we actually, when we left the theater, one of the people who was with us was kind of upset because she was like, where's Lex Luthor? And we were like, I think they did what people have done with The Amazing Spider-Man, where they're like, we know you're expecting, like, Mary Jane and Doc Ock and the Green Goblin, so let's show you someone you might not know. And it felt like they did the same thing with this movie, where in order to avoid the shadow of every other movie that has come out, they just picked something that has not been remade yet.
Yet they chose Zod, which is kind of an interesting choice because Zod was a villain primarily created from the second Superman film, which, as a villain, when I first heard that was announced, that surprised me because it's just a case of either they're going to try to copy Richard Donner or they're going to try to top Richard Donner. Didn't quite expect the angle they took.
I felt that Zod was necessary and that we've all seen Superman hold back all of his powers till the very end and then use his trump card of laser vision or lifting a bus but with Zod he couldn't just say, I'm superer than you.
Well, yeah, let's just say they did cut out some of the cheesiness Zod was known for. No, kneel before Zod moments, which was a good thing. To be honest, though, I had mixed feelings about Michael Shannon's performance because there were times where he didn't necessarily have that. I mean, when he was intimidating, he could be really intimidating as Zod, but there were a couple times where it just felt like, almost kind of like it broke a little bit.
He looked kind of like a puppy.
Well, yeah, that's exactly. It was kind of.
Dark, scary puppy.
He was a puppy that, like, it was like a big scary dog that you could tell deep down, like, could be a puppy to someone.
Well, yeah, and that's what felt kind of weird to me because given the character's motivations that are revealed at the end, I try to keep these spoiler free, so I'll try to phrase it as best as I can. It was just kind of a case that, I don't know, if they really want to develop some of the more vulnerable aspects of Zod, they could have done it a little bit better, or at least have it be a little bit more smooth, because it felt a little bit jarring, at least to me.
It was a little like, I've been your enemy the entire time, but really I have these feelings, and this is why I'm doing it.
Yeah, it felt like, I don't know, as I was watching it, I kind of expected it the whole time, but it was easy to forget. You don't know, like, you could either forget that he has like a more human side or forget that you never realized he had both at the same time. You remembered he was human or you remembered he was a general, but you never were like, not human, I mean like feels, because obviously he's not human, but you know what I mean?
He's humanoid.
He's humanoid, he has a heart and it hurts, so.
One major thing that a lot of people were bringing up prior to this film's release, especially with the news that Warner Brothers is planning on moving forward, was the whole idea of how it introduces this cinematic universe that DC's been trying to create ever since Marvel released the Avengers. Personally, I didn't really see that kind of world building they were trying to accomplish. And I mean, they didn't even really try the whole post-credits thing that Marvel movies have become known for, which I kind of liked, because at least meant that I didn't...
We're trying to be Marvel.
Which is a good thing, because...
Like Marvel trying to be DC.
Oh, you step on.
Oh, you step off, girl.
Anyway, I mean, if they build upon some of the elements that are introduced, they could have a nice solid foundation, kind of like how the first Iron Man film set it up. but to me it didn't really feel so much like it was like establishing a cinematic universe, which I think is a good thing because it's kind of one of those cases where DC at least leaves it on a fairly like sort of conclusive, not really set in stone sort of feel, so that if the film either does poorly or is going to be has to be rebooted again, then they at least don't have to worry about contradicting a whole lot of things.
I was actually like looking the whole time for hints to like any other place, because in preparation to kind of like get to know things, I watched a little Justice League, just like 6 episodes of it, and there was this awesome part in the Justice League where someone's on the like highway. I think it was Justice League anyway, and they're on the highway and it has the little mile markers and it says like Gotham City this far away, like Central City this far away, Metropolis this far away. It might have been Batman Year One. Anyway, it was one of those things, and I was like, I liked it because it was just this tiny little other stuff in the universe without shoving it down your throat. So I was looking really hard for hints the whole time and I didn't see any.
Yeah, though it's kind of interesting how even throughout most of the film they don't even mention Metropolis by name, much like how they don't even mention the name Superman by name and only kind of mention it sort of in passing. And that's something that's kind of, well, essentially Nolan-esque, because that was the same thing they did with the Batman with the Dark Knight trilogy. I mean, they mentioned Gotham by name, but they never really referred to like Batman directly as Batman. They pretty much kind of took the whole, that's what the media calls him, sort of approach to it.
Which I thought was good. It helped. One of the things that I really liked about this movie was something I liked about the Dark Knight movies, because it's really hard to make both Batman and Superman not as ridiculous as they look and sound. And when you put the responsibility for making them sensationalized and ridiculous on the public, then it makes them, it's like, hey, we didn't name him this. The reporters needed a catchy headline, so they named him this. And it literally, that was all it took for me to be like, all right, I have no beef with his name being Superman, because I've always thought that was so ridiculous. His name is Superman.
Like, he is a product of the 40s, so.
Exactly, but it was that they took something that they couldn't avoid, like they could not avoid the name Superman. He's Superman. And they tweaked it so that you're like, all right, I can see this, I can buy this, and I don't find it as ridiculous. Go see it, it's definitely worth seeing. As someone who came into it with like I didn't have no expectations, but I just wasn't as loyal to Superman. I bought this shirt for her.
They literally bought these shirts today.
I bought these shirts on my way to the theater because she loves World's Finest. And I was like, oh, we can go to this thing as World's Finest. And so I was like totally not ready to defend this movie when I came to it. And I think I liked it better than anyone that I went to see it with. So it's a really good movie. It's definitely much better than Superman Returns.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
So yeah, overall, if you're a fan of the Nolan movies, you'll probably get some enjoyment out of it. And if you're someone who's coming at it with barely any familiarity with Superman aside from maybe the cartoons, you'll also find some enjoyment with it. You may have to brace yourself for some changes, especially if you're a diehard fan. But even from the diehard fan standpoint, at least to my knowledge, she's been kind of quiet the whole time.
I know!
But basically, if you're a diehard fan, you'll still get some enjoyment out of it. You just still kind of gotta brace yourself a little bit for what you're getting into, because it's not the exact same Superman from the cartoons or the Richard Donner movies.
But it's a good thing that it's not the exact same Superman.
Very
It's a good thing.
Because Bryan Singer tried that, remember? It bombed, rightly so.
There's only so much you can do to Superman, you know?
While still maintaining that he is Superman.
Yeah.
Which is something that a lot of people worried about, but even when you may think like, oh, but he's got the gruff beard, oh, but he's doing this, like,
The beard
But
was
he
awesome.
doesn't have red panties.
But basically the whole idea is that at its heart, he's still the same character. It's just the case that he's still the same character. It does take a little time for him to grow on you. At least it took time for Henry Cavill's performance to grow on me. But at the end of the film, that's when you realize this is Superman. It's the same character. He's pretty much got the same, lack of a better term, charm that Superman's kind of known for.
What it comes down to for me is Superman and all the other things I've seen him in has been very godlike. Like he is this all-powerful thing that descends from the heaven and helps you and leaves, and he's almost detached and scary because of that. Like what would happen if you just suddenly decided we were ants to him, you know? And this movie did a really good job of showing why he cares about us and why he would save us and why he keeps coming back and makes him not so scary. He feels like one of us instead of Space Jesus. Yeah.
Which, speaking of which, I could almost see a little bit of an Injustice vibe thrown into certain parts, particularly with how the film ended, at least with like the final major thingy. Again, no spoilers. But basically, there's a few shades of Injustice Gods Among Us, that video game that I've yet to actually play.
It's good. Play it.
It's good.
But basically, point being, it's a good film. If you're a die-hard fan, you gotta brace yourself for the changes, but then again, in this case, change is good because, well, superheroes, especially one that has lasted as long as Superman, need to go through certain changes to keep them interesting. The basic personality can stay the same, but if you're recycling the same stuff over and over again, it can become stagnant, much like what Bryan Singer learned with Superman Returns. So, on my personal scale, I'm going to be giving Man of Steel a 4 out of 5. Reason why I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 and not the full 5 out of 5 was, again, the beginning was kind of long. There were some cheesy dialogue bits at the very end that were kind of eh. And the music, again, it was the whole caveman sledgehammer type of score. The sort of thing. And so that's
We're killing Kimi.
So that's why I'm giving Man of Steel a 4 out of 5. So what are your guys' ratings?
I don't know. I wouldn't give it a 5 out of 5 because I wouldn't give most movies a 5 out of 5, but I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5. Like, I thought it was a pretty good movie. Same thing with you. It was the only thing for me is it was kind of long, especially at the beginning. Like, it was kind of long, but I really, really liked it. I would go see it again, which is usually how I judge if I like a movie. If I get out of the movie and I would go see it again, it's a pretty good movie. I liked it a lot.
I'd probably judge it a solid 4 out of 5 as well. Like has been covered. It felt like it was kind of stumbling at the beginning of the movie to kind of catch itself, but then it caught a good stride and it finished well.
Go see it. You
Now.
won't regret it.
Alright, so that's it for this special episode of Romney's Reviews. As for what I'm looking at next week, I forgot to check IMDb, so whatever it is, that's the film I'm reviewing next week, and yeah, I'll see you all next time.